On this week's episode, we're chatting about No Man's Sky and all its launch week impressions. It's Friday, August 12th, 2016. You're listening to the 1P versus 2P podcast. I'm Taylor Ray. This week, well, Ryan's out. He's on vacation. So instead, I'm joined by friend of the show and also listener, Alex Merenyi. Welcome.
Hey, man. Good to be here. I'm excited that you guys will actually hear it when I yell back at you this time.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm always looking out for your tweets about our show. I always appreciate it. Yeah, all your impressions. But let's talk about your impressions about No Man's Sky, because I know you've mentioned that you've already played several hours of it so far. Personally, I haven't played it myself, but I'm very, very curious about it. So tell me about your experience so far.
Sure. So, I guess, I'll kind of preface it by saying this. It's, if you want to come into it cold, I'll kind of give you the sort of the overview, and then I don't know what else you've got planned for the episode, but if that's it, if you just want to kind of know the direction of the thumb, you may want to skip, say, okay, yep, there it is, and then move on. Yeah. That being said, it's also a really hard game to spoil for reasons that I'll get into in a minute. The short version is I like it. I like it a lot. And, I generally think that games reviews are kind of a fine art of cow excrement, but I think it is the kind of game that is, you need to know who you're kind of talking to. I played a lot of Sims. I played a lot of Minecraft. I've done about a decade into WoW, and I find it great. It's a lot of fun. It's a really refreshing change of pace. It's a very different game. If you're looking for something that is going to be action-packed, that you're going to have something to do every minute of the day, and most importantly, if you're looking for something that is going to hand-lead you into the next event, this is not the game for you. Yeah,
it very much seems like, and I'm trying to remember the quote, Jeff Gersman on the Giant Bombcast this week said, it's like the ultimate chill simulator.
Yeah.
You think that's accurate?
No, I absolutely do. It's very different from, I think, any game that I've played in the last, the last couple of years at least. The best analogy that I think I've heard is that it's sort of like if you took Minecraft, crossed it with Starbound, and then threw the whole thing into a Frank Frazetta 1970s science fiction novel cover.
Oh, that's deep.
Yeah, it's weird. So, I guess the thing to sort of say at the top is that the whole game, if you're not familiar with it, what they've basically done is they've built an incredible simulator, and then they sort of wrapped a game around it. And unlike Minecraft or, to some degree early Starbound or The Sims or something like that, the game itself is pretty compelling. But keep in mind that this is a simulator first and a game second. If you're looking for these major action set pieces, they're there, but you have to hunt for them. Instead, most of your time is going to be spent walking over the surface of a planet, feverishly staring at your exposure bar, wondering if you've got enough plutonium to shove into your gun so that you can dig up some more iron to live long enough to go get ship fuel.
So there's constantly this sort of survival game element where you're checking against meters that are, constantly depleting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that ever feel like a chore? Because I know some games do that pretty well, and some games are just way too stressful where it totally drains all the fun out of it.
I don't know yet.
Okay, fair enough.
As you mentioned, I'm less than 10 hours in at this point. I certainly haven't been playing it as much as some other people, but I think I've put in some time into it at this point, and so far, no, it hasn't felt like a chore. It hasn't felt like, oh god, now I need to go get some more flumbarps to shove in my whatever so that I can breathe in this water. It feels like hey, I'm on an alien world. I need to figure out what here is useful to me and what I don't need to care about. The major defining piece of this game is this procedurally generated world, and procedurally generated universe, and that is key to kind of understanding why it doesn't necessarily feel repetitive. Is each world that you go to, and by the way, with very limited exception, you will be the first person to ever go to one of those worlds. Each world has its own intricacies. You'll find a planet covered in water. You'll find a planet covered in trees. You'll find a planet covered in animals. You'll find planets that are mixes of all of the above. Or you'll be like me and you'll find a ton of burned out radioactive rocks.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Now, on these sort of like different environments, I'm guessing there's just like a lot of different resources to search for. And have you ever felt like trapped on a world where all of a sudden, let's say, you need to either find resources to upgrade a part of your ship, or you're missing something key that you need to survive, and you end up dying because the planet is missing that specific resource? Have you run into that situation before?
Not at all. They've done a very good job of, there's a huge amount of stuff that you can harvest. Not all of it is mandatory. And that's sort of the key thing, is that everything's sort of broken down into these logical groups. You have things that are going to sell for a lot. There you've got things that you can use to recharge other stuff, and then you have resources that you can use to build. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, that's what you're collecting. The individual piece parts may be different. There's a difference between plutonium and carbon, which all of the chemists in attendance are nodding their head saying, yes, there is. And they have different things that they do in the game, and when you're in the crafting system, they're different. But when you're talking about fueling your ship, you need an isotope. And that means carbon, that means plutonium, that means any of the other isotopes that you can shove in there. And at the end of the day, the more large-scale things, the things that keep you flying and keep you breathing, you can pretty much replace any of those piece parts. Some of them will be more efficient than others.
Got it. And what about like inventory management in general? And you're talking about when you're on a planet, let's say, you're mining for resources, isotopes, whatever. Is it difficult to manage all that in your inventory? Is it limited? Is it unlimited? What's that like?
It's limited, and I think one of the places that the game kind of trips up a little bit is in the inventory management system, especially very early. You essentially have 3 inventory panes. You have one for your suit, one for your ship, and then one for your multi-tool. Your multi-tool can't actually carry things, but it factors into the other part of the game, which is crafting. You craft components that fit into one of these systems. Now, if you're saying to yourself, wait, I use that to hold stuff, you're absolutely right. You kind of have to make a decision. Do I want my ship to be a total laser-wielding badass and being able to shoot everything out of the sky, or do I want to make a cargo ship that can haul everything? You do have to make a choice, and it's an interesting choice that you get presented with. Do I want a fighter or do I want a cargo ship? You
mentioned something that I want to touch base on, because this is the part that I'm most interested in, is the combat, let's say. Yeah. What is that like? Because now it was very weird with how Hello Games sort of handled the messaging behind No Man's Sky and its release, all the hype that's built over the years. They sort of teased, well, this is a large universe and there's some multiplayer elements. It's sort of this procedurally generated thing, but there's no real multiplayer. You're not going to be encountering other players on planets that they might have visited also, or that they're currently on, right? And so what I'm asking about is like combat. Like what is that involved? Is there ship combat? Are you fighting aliens or are you fighting animals? Like what's that like in No Man's Sky?
Sure. And there's a piece there that I want to come back to, but to answer your specific question, combat is a part of the game, right? You have your multi-tool. Your multi-tool can be upgraded to shoot both your mining laser and actual bullets and grenades and. It does a lot of stuff for you, and combat, especially when you're talking about engaging with these sentinels, which are present on every world and part of the major overarching plot, or if you're talking about aliens alien creatures that happen to be hostile, you will fight them, and it's basically an FPS when you're fighting them. And Taylor, you know this, but those of you listening at home probably don't. I'm absolute crap at first-person shooters, so I've died a fair amount to that. But it is part of the game. You are interacting with alien species. Some of them will be friendly, some of them won't. Ship-to-ship combat, I think, is actually a little bit stronger than your on-the-ground combat. It gives you a really nice targeting reticle. It really calls back to a lot of very old dogfighting games. But again, this is something that doesn't necessarily come out every single time you go into space. I've been in two fights now with 2 different ships. I've won both of them, although I did get blown out of the sky. I still won. But so it's not something that happens every time. It is something that does happen.
I've heard other people mention that they've been targeted by like space pirates, and the more you're carrying, the more likely it is for them to appear and to start attacking you in space. Have you run into that?
Yes.
And what was that like?
I beat the crap out of them. I don't know what to tell you.
And what ultimately happens if you end up dying? Like, let's say on the planet versus in space, do you lose everything? Are you able to go back and recover that sort of stuff?
Sure. So, what happens, and again, there is a little bit of plot element to it, so I don't want to give too much away. But basically, what happens is that you will, if you've ever played an MMO, you're familiar with the idea of a corpse run.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you just get back to where you died, and you'll be able to pick your inventory back up. The important piece to keep in mind, though, is that all of your upgrades to your gear, while they still will be there, they will need to be repaired. So in addition to kind of managing the fuel level of all your different stuff, be it your engines or your guns or whatever like that, you're also going to be doing repairs to them over time as you lose or you get beat up in a fight, that kind of thing.
I know a lot of people have also mentioned the fact that the pre-order bonuses, specifically with the ship that you initially get, and I believe a lot of the pre-order bonuses are tied to, like, if you ordered it at GameStop or if you ordered it on Amazon, whatever, it doesn't matter. It sort of breaks the beginning of the game with something that's key in part of the first couple hours of No Man's Sky's tutorial, which, as I understand it, is building like a hyperdrive, like a key component to start flying into space to reach the center of the universe.
Yep.
Now, did you actually redeem and use the ship as a pre-order bonus?
I did not, although I did see kind of exactly what they're talking about, and it's probably a good thing that we're doing it today because PC launch is today, right? Friday?
Right. Yeah, we're recording on Thursday, but it's going up on Friday. So technically it's out today. Yep. Yeah,
anyone who's picking this up on PC, or if you're picking up your pre-order, you haven't played it yet, you're waiting for the weekend for it. Just a caveat for it. What I'll kind of do is give you an idea. So basically, what happens is you start the game and you are by yourself on the surface of the planet. You see your ship, but it's broken. You got to put it back together. What they did as a pre-order bonus is that they gave you a ship, and unfortunately, that ship matches with where you should be after the end of their little introductory quests. So it has a hyperdrive for you. Now, that's great. You don't need to fix a hyperdrive, but unfortunately, it means that you don't actually get the recipe to provide fuel to said hyperdrive. And if you don't do that on the first planet, you literally can't. I believe they have already patched it or have worked out a way to patch it or something along those lines, but just as a heads up for anybody who hasn't played it yet, don't redeem that ship until you're off your first world. At that point, go ahead and redeem it. You'll figure out what you need to from then on out, but just something to be aware of.
Well, tell me, like, how many hours have you played? Remind me again.
Just under 10 hours.
Okay. Have you named a bunch of planets already?
So I'm playing on PS4. Obviously, it's not yet out for PC. I have tried to name a bunch of planets, and invariably I have hit the submit button when I meant to caps lock it. So if you ever see a bunch of planets that are all just spaces, that's probably me.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because PS4 players who are playing right now during launch week, which came out on Tuesday, like, it must be hard to navigate that keyboard. I always know it's super awkward, no matter if you're using, like, the directional buttons with the on-screen keyboard. It must be slow and monotonous. Are you constantly being prompted to name things?
No, not at all.
Okay. What are the things that you can name, though?
Oh, pretty much everything that you encounter in nature. Some people are going back and forth on whether or not you can name your ship. I haven't seen a way to do it yet. It may be something that's later in the game. But basically, when you enter a new star system, you can name that star system. When you land on a planet, you can name that planet. When you find a point of interest on that planet, you can name that point of interest. When you find a plant, you can name the plant. When you find an animal, you can name the animal. Pretty much the only things you can't name are yourself, your gear, your ship. Like I said, maybe you can name your ship, but I'm not sure, or the elements themselves. The other thing you can't name are space stations. They are out there, and they're very important, and they already have names.
And what about NPCs? Like, you were talking about the Sentinels and other aliens also that you encounter. Are they already named?
The Sentinels themselves have names, yes. And other aliens that you encounter, and this is one of the major mechanics of the system, they have their own language.
Right.
And so a major part of this game is actually meeting these aliens, understanding their language through, various things that are across the different galaxies and starting to communicate with them. They come into it with their own names.
And that brings me to something that I think is really unclear to me, is that what's the object of this game? Is it to learn their language so you could discover the history of the universe? Like, what's the ultimate goal in No Man's Sky?
It depends who you ask. There is a nominal hand-wavy kind of thing, and this is one of the things that. So I kind of alluded to earlier, I think No Man's Sky is a really fascinating game, and it's a really interesting game, and I think they needed to hire some PR guys. Because Sean Murray, who's the lead developer, I think he's got a brilliant world in his head, and certainly by playing this game, you understand that this is a kid who grew up in the Australian outback reading sci-fi novels, and then he made that into a video game. And so it's really cool, and it's a really interesting universe. But a lot of the confused messaging around this, I think, is just the fact that they were a very small team. They didn't have resources to have a conclusive message about the game, and it's really hard to articulate what this game is about because it's so broad. If you ask me what this game is about, it's about exploring, and it's about adventuring, and it's about having a game that you can pick up for 2 hours, go and see something that maybe no one else will ever see, sharing some screenshots, and then slowly making your way towards the center of this galaxy. I've read some spoilers about what's there. I don't want to go into that, but I will say that there is an overarching plot. There are different ways to get there. It's not quite the Mass Effect 3 ending. It looks like it's a little more interesting and dynamic than that. But
thank God.
Yeah, exactly. But it is, do keep in mind that the point of this game isn't just to race to the end. It's really to enjoy the travel there. Somebody likened it to taking a Sunday drive or going hiking. That's the kind of activity that this game really mirrors because it's about the journey, not so much about where you're going. And if that all sounds really hippy-dippy to you, go and play it for an hour, and I have a feeling you'll get what I mean.
Speaking of hippy-dippy, talk to me about the art style. Do you like it?
Oh, God, I love the art style so much. So I've just ragged on it. I've ragged on the two areas, which is sort of combat and PR that I don't like about this game. Understand, I love this game. I've put about 200 hours into Fallout and Metal Gear Solid 5 end of last year. I will easily put that much time into No Man's Sky. And a large part of that is the fact that the art design is beautiful. Every world is, even when you're talking about your blasted hellscapes, like I've been encountering, every world is beautiful. It has its own thing that it brings to the table. Various flora and fauna, different bulbs of weirdness growing out of the planet. I've encountered some I've encountered some element called emerald, which I think is supposed to be kind of emerald-like, but they're basically giant green polyps on the face of this planet. And then you just blast them and then turn them in and start selling them. They look beautiful, especially on these weird hellscapes. If you've ever looked at old, and I keep bringing it up, but it's very true, old 1970s, 1980s book covers, that's exactly the aesthetic that they were going for, and they nail it perfectly. If you like the look of 2001, all of its weirdness aside, all of the Kubrickism in it, that's what this game feels like. That's what those space stations feel like. You can stare into the abyss and then be like, oh, there's a point of light there. I want to go there, and you can do it. And it's all because of this amazing art style that just kind of pops to life right in front of you.
So there's so many things to look around and see in first person on these planets, but talk to me about like flying around in the cockpit view in your ship in space, traveling from planet to planet. Is it this one, like flying between different systems or between different planets? Do your surroundings change a lot in color? Or is it just one vast openness, just black stars all around like we would expect in the real world?
It's more colorized than that. It's definitely a colorized version of what we would think of as for real space. If you think about more, each solar system sort of has a palette in space. You've got some kind of reddish tones. You have a lot of yellows, and it sort of depends on the color of your main system of your star. Which, again, if you're into astronomy, you kind of have an idea that you've got some yellow dwarfs, you've got some red giants, and that sort of informs not only the solar system palette, but also the worlds that form around it. What kind of world would pop up around a red dwarf? Well, it'd be, maybe colder, especially if it's really farther out. So let's have a lot of snow on this world, and then let's have some, blasted rock that is more purple. But when you're in space, yeah, it's a little bit more uniform. There's a ton of asteroids. There's a ton of, just rocks flowing around that you need to find. And then you have your different space stations. Those are largely homogeneous, although there are some differences in structure and like what kind of add-ons they have plugged into them, depending on what alien race owns them.
Well, it's interesting also because I've sort of looked ahead and saw some of what Hello Games is planning for future DLC and patches to No Man's Sky. And one of the major ones is like adding sort of this like home base element to it. Do you know about that?
I had heard something about that. I'm interested to see how that turns out.
I'm not sure where they're going with it, but I imagine they're sort of following the footsteps of Fallout 4, where, of course, you have settlements that are already existing, but you can customize them in any way. Build your structures, invite allies, that sort of thing. And I'm wondering if they're going more towards just like a static RPG environment for No Man's Sky, where some players might be too overwhelmed with the exploration and say, well, there's not much else for me to do, and instead turn it into more of like a management simulator.
I don't know about that. I think that would be kind of selling it short in a way. I could definitely see them saying, hey, you know what, so a lot of the worlds right now, you kind of feel like a locust. You show up, you spend 15, 20 minutes there, you find some resources that are cool, you find some interesting things there, you learn some words, and then you leave. I could see, getting to a planet saying, God, this is really beautiful, I really want to settle here, I like this a lot, and having that become your main base, being able to build some structures there somewhat closer, instead of the Fallout 4 model, kind of going more towards like a Starbound model, where you say, hey, I've got a lot of resources in my bank, I also just don't want to carry them around. Let me build a storage unit here, and then let me build a place where I can sleep, or something along those lines. I think if you don't like exploration, this is just flatly not the game for you.
I've also heard a lot of people make the comparison between No Man's Sky and Starbound, but with Starbound, I understand that you can actually, right, you get to a planet, you name it, you also have like set coordinates. So if you had a friend who wanted to visit the same planet with you, you could send them the coordinates and theoretically they can go there. Is that possible in No Man's Sky?
Well, and this is where the other part of the PR issue, which is that we don't know. There was a big the No Man's Sky subreddit is kind of hilarious right now because it alternates every day between deifying Sean Murray and wanting his head on a stick. He has said time and time again, this is not a multiplayer game. This is not a multiplayer game. Do not expect to see other people. And then right before the game came out, when this guy is running on maybe an hour and a half a night of sleep, he said, well, maybe you'll be able to see somebody if they're in the same place as you. Well, thinking, okay, we've got 18 exabillion planets, it's never going to happen. Well, of course, day one, 2 Twitch streamers ran into each other. Or they should have, except they're on the same planet, they're identifying the same things, and they're not seeing each other. So everybody exploded saying, oh, you lied, you said that there was going to be multiplayer in this game, there isn't right now. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I think there's probably something in the code that's allowing it, but they're also looking at so much load right now during the launch week that's probably just turned off.
Interesting. Yeah, because all along he's said, up into this release, Sean Murray mentioned that it's unlikely you will run into another player in the universe because there are just 15 quintillion planets. The odds of you running into another player are extremely, extremely slim to none. Yeah,
exactly. And, again, from what I've seen, and I've been to all of about 4 star systems so far, I haven't seen hide nor hair of anybody else. Certainly I think the majority of people are in their own little sandbox. They're exploring their own little part of the galaxy. Over time, yeah, eventually you'll run into each other. But the important thing to remember is that this is something where they're not aiming for it. This is intended to be a solo experience, and you probably aren't going to be able to get your guild together and then claim a planet. As much as that might be fun, and believe me, as somebody who has a very active guild of, sort of gamer friends, I'd love to do that. It's just not the game for it.
Yeah, that is an interesting take. So let me ask you about more about a critical review about this. If you could make a few refinements, add some new features to No Man's Sky that would improve the overall experience, what would they be?
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. I think combat is a little bit loose right now, and I understand it's not the focus of the game, but it does come up enough, especially when you're dealing with Sentinels early on, and this may be something that gets resolved by, especially certainly the mid or end point of the game. It feels a little bit loose. And what I mean by that is that you feel a little underpowered for the things that eventually come and fight you. Sentinels especially, again, without trying to get too much into it, it's almost sort of like a GTA-style system. The Sentinels would like to prevent you from doing anything to a planet. So if you do a lot of stuff and you're mining in one spot repeatedly, the Sentinels are going to show up and they'll be like, hey, man, you should knock it off. And then you don't, and then they start fighting you. And the little guys are really easy to swat away. And the big guys, trust me, I've fought them, are not easy to swat away. And they will end you, especially very early in the game. So the question is sort of, and that, like I said, I think it feels a little loose. I think that the space combat feels much tighter by comparison, especially even very early in the game. You get an idea of how to deal with this brawling in space and how to deal with these pirates that you don't necessarily get as clear an idea of when you're on the surface. Again, just my opinion, I've seen that go the other way where people really hate space combat, so that's fine. The only other thing I would say is that I think the inventory management system, especially when you're dealing with individual stacks of things, once you start getting into crafting, is very restrictive very early. You combine raw materials into finished product, kind of like Minecraft or, again, Starbound, and those finished products generally don't stack with each other. So if you're trying to make a bunch of antimatter because you need to make a bunch of hyperspace fuel, you kind of have to do it one by one in order to keep the open spaces in your inventory.
So it's a little slow.
Yeah, it's a little slow, and it almost punishes you once you've kind of gotten on the right track in a way that I'm not wild about. But again, those are fairly minor quibbles.
And it's so weird to see something like this, No Man's Sky, that is just so ambitious, and people really have inserted their own expectations in this game that I think make it a little bit unfair. But with all the hype that's been built around No Man's Sky over the past several years, right? Like, do you think overall it met your expectations?
I think it met my expectations pretty head on. It is fun. It's fun to show up on a planet and be like, what is going on this world? Why are there friggin' T-Rexes that are stomping around with ridiculous swagger? If you get a minute, look up a video called Swagasaurus Rex, because that's the kind of stuff that you're dealing with here, which is just a Tyrannosaurus Rex with tiny little arms walking around like he owns the place. It's hilarious. And this is the kind of stuff that shows up on every planet.
I'm going to put that link in the show notes for sure.
Yeah,
I'll look that up after this.
It's so good. It's so good. So that's the kind of thing that I was expecting. It's not one of these great space operas. It's not something that I think bit off more than they could chew. I think if they jumped more on the multiplayer bandwagon, then it would have been more of a disappointment, because I don't think that they could have gotten that in time. It's just with the scale of everything that they tried to build, I just don't think they could have executed on it. I had no idea that the languages and the aliens were even a thing in the game, and instead they're a major component. That's really cool. And you just keep finding these little things in this game that are interesting and neat that you wouldn't expect. And then there's also just kind of fundamentals to the game itself that I was really happy to see. They've kind of taken a lot of gaming sacred cows and killed them for really good effect.
How so?
So, as an example, the tutorial. The tutorial of the game, let me rewind a minute. When you start the game, you see the logo, right? And then a star field, and then you wake up. There's no
menus, menus, or anything like that?
Nothing. You wake up. And so you're sitting there, right? Like, okay, where's my opening cinematic? Did I accidentally skip it? No, you wake up because you don't know anything about this universe. And then it kind of tells you, like, okay, hey, here's the buttons to move around. Although, actually, come to think of it, I don't even think it tells you that. It assumes that you know how to move around in a first-person shooter. It assumes that you understand that you're going to need to poke stuff in order for resources to pop out. And it makes some assumptions about you. The game treats you like an adult. In this way, it's actually really close to, if you believe it or not, Mega Man X.
Okay.
You ever get the chance, play through the very beginning of Mega Man X. It teaches you how to play the game right at the beginning. It doesn't just pop up a menu that says, hey, you got to jump on this thing to get ahead. The same thing with No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky tells you how to recharge weapons. It doesn't tell you that you need to recharge your suit or your helmet, but your suit and your helmet have exactly the same bar as your weapon, and they're all reasonably close to each other. So as it's teaching you that you need to recharge your weapon, you can look at it and say, that's got a bar too. I wonder what that bar does. And then when you kind of navigate over to it, you see, oh, this is related to my hazmat bar. And because I started on a toxic world, my bar is going down really fast. I need to recharge that. It treats you like an adult rather than trying to walk you through every instance of or possible permutation of the game with a magical fairy that won't shut up. And that's one of the things that I really, really appreciated about it, because I was so scared coming into it, because it's got all these mechanics, it's got all these different things that can happen. You could spend half of this game easily sitting in a tutorial being told how to play the game, but instead it just trusts that you'll figure it out and tells you to go have fun.
So rather than explicitly hold your hand, it's teaching you the mechanics in a very interesting way, in an open way, to let you figure them out for yourself. That's a sign of, I think, like a really, really good design. And Mega Man X, I haven't thought about that game for a while. It's one of my all-time favorites, but I never thought of it like, they don't literally give you text tutorials. The way the level is designed teaches you, I can jump off walls, I can charge my shot. I think that is really a great deliberate choice for No Man's Sky to take, especially for a game that is all about exploring things for yourself, exploring the universe, exploring what the story could be, right?
Exactly. And it starts from the very beginning of saying, listen, we're not going to tell you where to find antimatter. You're going to need to figure that out. And we're going to tell you what it's used for. We're going to tell you how to use it once you've got it. We're going to tell you, hey, listen, you need antimatter to shove in your hyperdrive in order to go to hyperspace. Like, it actually doesn't ever tell you anywhere that brings you to another star system, but you can kind of figure it out because you're familiar with these sci-fi tropes. And you can kind of figure it out because of, other context clues that it gives you. It just doesn't need to necessarily pop up a big thing on the screen that says, hey, click on this to go another planet.
Other people have alluded to this so-called center of the universe and how to get there and what is there. Why do I need to go to the center of the universe? Does the game ever explain that, or are you just assuming this or discovering this by listening to people who've already played the game?
So there is an overarching sort of quest line, and I hesitate to say quest line because that sort of implies a bit more than it is. There's basically a box at the lower right-hand corner of your screen that says, hey, here's an idea for your next objective. And it is definitely directing you towards the center of the galaxy. When you go to that galaxy map for the first time, it says, hey, here's where you are, and here's the next planet that's on a straight line towards the center of the galaxy. Or, excuse me, the next star system that's on a straight line towards the center of the galaxy. Now, it's up to you whether you want to go there or not. You can actually turn that off entirely and just free explore. But the game is definitely kind of gently nudging you that direction. Yeah. I have no idea what's there. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I think it's be cool.
I think this is like an example of a game that you definitely don't want to spoil it for yourself, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. It is. And again, I hesitate to say it's even something that you can necessarily spoil, right? Like, I can talk about the first 10 hours of my experience in this game for about 10 hours, and then you can sit down and play it and have a completely different experience. I still haven't run into a planet that has grass. Meanwhile, I got a buddy of mine who can't get off ice worlds, and every time he does get off an ice world, it's just a world that's covered in grass. So it's a completely different game every single time you're playing through it, unless you happen to, throughout whatever random instance of math, you happen to run into the exact same path someone else took.
So there might be some value in starting this game over from scratch, or not at all. It's the complete opposite, where you could just keep playing this game infinitely.
I think you could probably keep playing this game as long as you want to.
It's a very, very deliberate choice, I think, for a game like No Man's Sky to say, there's no advantages, there's no real New Game Plus right now to start over from scratch. Just keep exploring. Relax with this kind of game.
Yeah.
It lacks a lot of just like you said, a lot of gaming sacred cows are missing from No Man's Sky, but in a good, deliberate way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a game, like I said, I can see coming back to this one for a very long time. It's kind of ironic that, and probably not entirely ironic and instead entirely planned, that this happens to come out the same week as a major pre-patch for WoW, which is another game that I unfortunately still haven't managed to pull myself away from. And the interesting thing is, putting these two in comparison, I can sit down, play WoW for an hour, get something done, and then relax with No Man's Sky for the rest of the night. I don't feel pressured to do anything. I don't feel like, oh, God, well, I've only explored one planet. I haven't done dick. Or, oh, God, I need to finish this whole planet before I move on to the next whole planet. Like, I know people who have done that. I know a guy who's spent about 25 hours in the game so far. He has been to 2 worlds. And if you want to play that way, there's nothing stopping you from doing it, because almost every world has the resources that you need to keep flying and keep exploring. It just is a different way of playing.
Well, on that note, what are your thoughts about the guy who got an early street copy, paid thousands of dollars to play this game before launch week, and ultimately was disappointed by being able to, quote-unquote, beat the game like in something around like 20 hours, right? What are your thoughts about that whole thing?
I think it's very interesting. The first thing he said in that Reddit post was, "Hey, it only took me 35 hours to get to the center of the galaxy." 35 hours,
that's right, yeah.
Yeah, and at the same time, if you go back three or four years when this was originally announced, and Sean Murray says, "Yeah, if you just make a beeline to the center of the galaxy, you can probably do it in about 35 hours." Okay, yeah. I don't begrudge him doing that. I just don't think he probably had a lot of fun. And it doesn't sound like he did. I could beat Castlevania Symphony of the Night in probably about 2 hours at this point, because I've got most of it memorized. You're probably not far off for something like Mega Man X. It's not about the adventure. You're not going into it for a fine adventure or to be told a story. You're going into it for the journey. And yeah, if you only want to drop 35 hours into it, you'll probably be really disappointed. It's the perfect counterpoint to a game like Final Fantasy XIII, where you have almost no agency in it, and you're entirely being told a story. And in fact, you would get more out of it if you just kept pausing and restarting, because then it gives you the little text blurbs that tells you what's happening in the game. Whereas with No Man's Sky, you get nothing like that. You restart the game, it just puts you back where your last save point was. Okay.
And what about like saving your progress? Is it constantly autosave, or is that a manual process?
It's semi-manual. So what happens is, and this is interesting because they've changed it. If you were following it before, there was an idea of basically, and this gets kind of back into the naming piece, right? It used to be that you would have to go to a place and upload what you found. They've actually changed that significantly. So now at any time, you can open a menu and just say like, hey, I've discovered all this stuff. I'm going to mark it, and then you upload it. And then you have a choice to name it at that point. When you do that, it saves. When you get into or out of your ship, it saves. When you reach a point on the surface, like a point of interest, and you kind of engage it, and then you track that area, it gives you a little like mini cinematic to show you the area that you just discovered. It saves. So even if you do die, even if you do, lose power, if your cat, as you probably heard in the background, decides to chew the power cable and your PS4 turns off, if anything like that happens, you're really never losing a ton of progress, just because it's not quite an autosave, because theoretically, yeah, you could be doing circles on the face of a planet for a while and not do anything productive, and you would lose all that progress, but all you're really losing there is burning fuel. If you do something worthwhile, it will generally save immediately afterwards. Okay,
good to know. Well, do you have any final thoughts about No Man's Sky? You want to say your last piece about it?
Sure. So again, and if you take away nothing else from this, take this away. It's not a game for everybody, and I'm really, really glad that it seems to be doing really well. People seem to be really enjoying it. A lot of people are buying it. I think a lot more people than expected. But it's not a game that every person is going to enjoy. And if you sit down and play it, and after the first hour you're like, I can't believe I have to do this for another 35 hours to finish this game, return it. Because it is a game where you have to want to enjoy it. Now, maybe an hour isn't enough time, maybe give it 2 or 3 hours, but certainly within something like the Steam return window, you can figure out if you're going to like this game or not. And again, it's entirely okay if that's the case. But if you are sitting there going, I just want to get out, and I can't right now for whatever reason, this is a great game for it. If you've got a couple hours to kill, you don't want something super heavy, you don't want something where you're going to have to memorize the plot or you're going to have to stress out about it. You want a game that you can just sit down and have a beer while you're playing. This is a great, great game for that. And it's an interesting game. I have posted more screenshots for it, and I'm sorry, again, Taylor, about the Twitter spam, but I have posted more screenshots from this game than I have from any other game, because you just keep finding weird stuff. I've found 2 Tyrannosaurus Rexes. One has fins, and one has spines. And you're like, okay, why are these guys on the same world? What kind of universe has generated these guys? What has put them here? But you can always... The thing that tempers it and that pulls it away from Minecraft is that kind of gentle push towards a central plot to say, okay, I've spent some time here. let's see what the central plot wants me to do next. Okay, I need to develop X to do Y so I can go to Z. Okay, well, let's see what's over there. Let's see what's over the next horizon.
Well, that's part of the fun, I think, like the fact that everyone's having their own unique experience, discovering their own worlds, different environments. That's part of the appeal, is that there's this meta level where people are sharing their screenshots on Twitter, Facebook, whatever, and it's interesting, really interesting as a person who doesn't own No Man's Sky yet, hasn't played it at all, to watch and look at these kinds of things, because I love where they're going. The art is beautiful on its own. The screenshots are just a work of art. And if you never even play it, like, and suffice to say, you know, I'm eventually going to play it. I'm thinking about just picking it up over this weekend on PC. Like, just watching other people's experiences has been awesome to see on its own.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most interesting things I've ever read about Mass Effect 3, and I'm sorry to bring Mass Effect 3 up again. I know.
Not at all. Not at all.
No,
we're going along a space theme on this episode. Okay, I'll allow it.
One of the interesting things I read about Mass Effect 3 was somebody who said, if you're upset about the Mass Effect 3 ending, consider the fact that the Mass Effect 3 ending started when you booted up the game. Which is an interesting way of thinking about it, because it was sort of the end of the series, and the idea was that, no, there isn't a discrete ending to it, because the whole game is the ending. In the same way, No Man's Sky may not have multiplayer in the game, but the multiplayer that you have is jumping on chat with your friends and saying, dude, you won't believe what I just found, or sharing the screenshots on Twitter or Reddit or Facebook or whatever. That's the multiplayer to this game. That's the multiplayer side, and that's what they were really trying to drive. And I think it's really cool.
Very awesome. Well, thank you again, Alex, for joining me all about our No Man's Sky impressions. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Hope you continue to have a lot of fun with it. I'm very anxious and excited to check it out myself. I expect that a lot of people are already considering it on their top 10 Game of the Year lists, wouldn't you say?
I think it'll remain to be seen. I mean, admittedly, I don't think that this year is quite as strong as last year was, for a whole host of reasons that are mostly named Metal Gear Solid 5. But certainly, if I had to put it in a list, this is the most fun I've had in a game this year. I don't know. I don't know what that counts for.
Too early to say, right? Definitely. Yeah. We're not there yet. We're not quite there at the end of the year yet. I got it.
I think that this would definitely go in contention.
I just wanted to add to the hype that's already there, all right? Just let me be.
No, that's what we need. We need more hype right now. Yeah. That's never been a problem.
Exactly. Well, thanks again, Alex. Really appreciate you joining to talk about No Man's Sky. That's it. If you liked our show, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes and Stitcher. Let us know what you think about our show. You can also listen to us on Google Play Music, TuneIn, Clamor, or our own site, 1pvs2p.com. You can also, as always, just search for us on your favorite podcast app. And like Alex mentioned, I'll be sure to post it. Remind me the name of the YouTube video I'm supposed to be looking up.
Swagasaurus Rex.
Swagasaurus Rex. I'm going to be putting that link in the show notes. So check that out. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at 1pvs2p_podcast. We're also on YouTube and Twitch. And as always, we want to thank Phonetic Hero for the use of his songs for our show, Coffee Stomp, and Super Manly Brothers X. Both of those songs are part of the compilation project Chiptunes=Win. Thanks again for listening. Thanks again, Alex, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you much. Have a good one, guys.
18 quintillion planets.
18 quintillion planets.
Yeah.
That's a hard number to wrap your head around. Is there are you ever worried the game might get boring after visiting the first trillion planets?